The barn stood in the fading light of the evening, its worn timbers creaking in the wind. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of hay and sweat, and the frantic sound of hooves pounding against the straw echoed off the walls. Goldie, the family's prized mare, was in labor. Her breathing was heavy, ragged, and the once gentle creature now paced in circles, eyes wide with panic. Ethan Blake stood just outside the stall, his palms pressed against the cool wood, feeling the heat radiating from the inside. His heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in shallow gasps. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. Goldie was due in a week, but now she was in the throes of something far worse. "Come on, girl. You've got this," Ethan muttered under his breath, even though he knew it wasn't likely to be true. No one had ever been able to breed twins in this part of Kentucky. Hell, some said it was a curse. Those that survived were never the same. Goldie let out a high-pitched whinny, the sound a cry of pain. Ethan's stomach twisted. He knew she needed help, but he wasn't sure who to turn to. Jared, his older brother, had been missing for hours, and the thought of calling their father, who had been absent for most of Athens' life, seemed futile. Ethan whipped out his phone, his hands shaking as he dialed the only number he could think of. Dr. Lacey, it's Ethan Blake. Something's wrong with Goldie. You've got to come. Now." The line clicked, and the voice on the other end sounded strained but reassuring. "I'll be right there, Ethan. Hold tight." Hey, as he hung up, a deep sense of dread settled in the pit of his stomach. He could hear Goldie's labor intensifying, the frantic whinnies blending with the growing silence of the barn. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, creeping around the edges of the old barn as the night stretched on. When Dr. Lacey finally arrived, she rushed in with her bag, her face tight with concern. She immediately went to the stall and examined Goldie. Ethan stood by, unable to move, watching in helpless silence. "This is bad," Dr. Lacey muttered, her voice low. She was trying to sound confident, but Ethan could tell she was worried. "We've got a breech delivery, and there's another one coming. The odds of both foals surviving are slim, but I'll do what I can." The next few minutes felt like hours. Dr. Lacey worked quickly, and the sound of hooves scraping against the barn floor was all Ethan could hear. Then, with a final push, Goldie gave birth to the first foal, a strong colt. He was shaky, his legs unsteady, but he let out a soft whinny as he struggled to his feet. Ethan breathed a sigh of relief. He thought they were out of the woods, but as Dr. Lacey moved to help the mare with the second foal, a deep sense of foreboding crept back into him. The second foal was coming, but she was stuck. The delivery was messy, and Goldie's pain grew more intense with every passing second. Dr. Lacey was doing her best, but it was clear the foal wasn't breathing. "I need you to stay calm," Dr. Lacey said, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "Help me, Ethan. I need you to help me pull." Ethan's hands shook as he stepped closer to the mare, his mind racing. He could barely focus on the words Dr. Lacey was saying, his thoughts spinning with 1,000 fears. What if they couldn't save the foal? What if both of them, Goldie included, didn't make it? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the foal emerged, weak and still, her little body limp in Dr. Lacey's hands. But then, something miraculous happened. With a few gentle taps on her chest, the foal gasped for air, her tiny body shuddering as she came to life. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't even realized he'd been holding. "That's it," Dr. Lacey said, her voice trembling with relief. "She's breathing. She's going to make it." The colt, Will, and the filly, Grace, were alive. Against all odds, both foals had survived. But as Ethan stood there, watching Dr. Lacey make sure both foals were stable, his mind kept returning to one question, one nagging thought that wouldn't leave him alone. Who would have done this? Who had bred Goldie behind his back? The memory of Jared sneaking around the barn months ago came flooding back. The late-night visits, the furtive glances, the way his older brother had started acting different. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, and soon the truth would come crashing down, shattering everything he knew. Ethan Blake wasn't your average teenager. In a world where everyone seemed to be running in circles, he had always been content with the quiet life. 17 years old, broad-shouldered from years of working in the barn, his hands weathered from the harsh Kentucky sun. He wasn't big on words, always the quiet one in school, the one who preferred the company of horses to people. His life revolved around the farm, his family, and his best friend, Goldie, the mare who had grown from a mere foal into a beloved companion over the years. His father, a man who had been more of a shadow than a presence in Ethan's life, had left the family when Ethan was just a kid. After that, it was just him and Jared. Jared, his older brother, had been the golden child, always striving for more, always dreaming of a life beyond the rural town of Ashland, Kentucky. Jared had gone off to college, leaving Ethan to pick up the pieces at home, managing the farm with their mother, who passed away when Ethan was young. Jared had returned recently, though, and things had changed. The brother, who had left for bigger things, came back broken, worn down, and bitter. He had dropped out of college, unable to pay his bills, weighed down by debt that had piled up in the city. The house, which had once felt like home, now seemed colder with Jared's presence. The tension in the air was palpable, as if the weight of his failure had settled like dust in every corner. Ethan didn't know how to help. Jared's pride prevented him from asking for it, and Ethan's quiet nature kept him from offering it. Their relationship had become strained, nothing like the easygoing bond they'd shared when they were younger. They'd grown apart, and the distance between them had only gotten wider with time. Still, in Ethan's heart, there was a lingering hope that they could find their way back to each other, even as Jared's bitterness festered. Jared was the one who'd introduced him to horses when they were kids. Jared had been the one who taught him how to saddle a horse, how to care for the barn, how to truly understand these magnificent creatures. But now, the love that had once been a shared bond seemed lost in the shadows of failure and disappointment. As Ethan walked through the barn the morning after the birth, his footsteps echoed in the silence. Goldie was lying in the straw, her two foals resting beside her. Will, the firstborn, was already on his feet, staggering around with his legs a little shaky but showing strength in his movements. Grace, the second foal, was nestled close to her mother, still weak but alive. Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The sight of the two foals, their tiny bodies struggling to stand, filled him with a warmth he hadn't realized he was missing. They were a miracle. And for a moment, everything felt right. But as he looked over at the empty corner of the barn where Jared usually sat during his rare visits, a dark cloud settled over his thoughts. Jared had been absent last night. He hadn't been there when Goldie had gone into labor, hadn't been there to help bring the foals into the world. And now, as Ethan stood alone in the barn, the quiet of the morning suddenly felt too heavy. It didn't make sense. Jared had always been involved in the animals, even after returning from college. His absence last night felt wrong. It felt deliberate. Ethan's thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice. "Ethan?" He turned to see Mrs. Langston standing at the barn door. A retired horse trainer who had lived down the road for as long as Ethan could remember. She was a kind soul with a sharp wit. She was the kind of person who had seen it all and wasn't afraid to speak her mind. "I brought some supplies," she said, holding up a basket of fresh hay, a few bags of grain, and a couple of bottles of milk. "Figured you might need a hand." Ethan smiled, though it was a tired one. He appreciated her help more than she could know. Mrs. Langston had been a constant in his life, teaching him the finer points of training horses when he was a kid. She'd become a surrogate grandmother after his mother's passing, and though Ethan didn't speak much, he knew he could always count on her. "Thanks, Mrs. Langston," Ethan said, his voice thick with exhaustion. "The foals are doing better now, but it's been a long night." Mrs. Langston's eyes softened as she looked over at the two foals. They're fighters, Just like you, Ethan." She paused, her gaze shifting to the far corner where Jared usually sat. "I see your brother's not around this morning." Ethan swallowed hard, his chest tightening at the mention of Jared. "No, he's not." Mrs. Langston raised an eyebrow, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "That boy's got a lot of pride. Doesn't want to face what he's done, does he?" "It's what?" Ethan didn't answer, but the truth hung heavy between them. Jared had always been the one to hide his failures behind a mask of arrogance. Ethan had always been the one to quietly pick up the pieces, to work hard without asking for attention or recognition. But it wasn't just pride that kept Jared away. There was something more, something that Ethan couldn't put his finger on yet. A cold shiver ran down Ethan's spine as he thought back to the nights he had seen Jared sneaking around the barn and months ago. And Jared had always been the type to act on impulse, and Ethan had brushed off the strange behavior. But now, after the birth of the foals, something didn't feel right. Why had Jared been so secretive? Why had he been so distant? Ethan's thoughts were interrupted again as Will nudged him with his soft nose, and Grace let out a weak whinny. For a moment, the foals took all of Ethan's attention, the weight of the world momentarily forgotten. But the question lingered in his mind. What was Jared hiding? It had been 3 days since the foals had been born, and Ethan was beginning to feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him in ways he hadn't expected. Will and Grace were doing well, growing stronger by the hour, but there was still one major concern he couldn't shake. Goldie, their prized mare, had been acting strange ever since the delivery. Her behavior was erratic, and it had Ethan on edge. She paced in tight circles in her stall, her eyes wide and unblinking, her usually calm demeanor completely replaced by a nervous energy. She hadn't eaten much in the past 2 days, a clear sign that something wasn't right. Ethan had tried everything he could think of, bringing in her favorite treats, soothing her with soft words, even offering her some hay, but nothing seemed to settle her. Each time he'd walk into the barn, her eyes would dart to him, and she would start moving again, circling the stall like a restless animal. Ethan wasn't an expert in animal behavior, but he knew Goldie better than anyone. He could tell when she was anxious, when something was bothering her. And right now, she seemed more than just stressed. She seemed desperate. The more Ethan watched, the more he realized that her anxiety was directed not just at the foals, but at something else, something hidden just beneath the surface. A shadow that hung over her, a secret she couldn't communicate, and it sent chills down Ethan's spine. One morning, as Ethan was preparing to check on Goldie again, he noticed something unusual. Goldie had a sudden outburst, kicking the stall door with all her might. The force of the impact sent a rattle through the barn, and Ethan rushed to her side, heart racing. "Goldie." "Easy, girl. Easy," he said, his voice soothing but firm as he tried to calm her. But the mare wasn't responding to him. She wasn't even looking at him. Her eyes were locked on the far corner of the barn, where a shadowy figure stood, watching her. It took Ethan a moment to recognize who it was. Jared. His older brother had been avoiding him for days, but here he was now, standing in the barn, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression unreadable. "Jared," Ethan's voice faltered as he took a step toward him. "What are you doing here?" Jared didn't answer immediately. Instead, he just stared at the mare, who was still visibly agitated. After a long pause, he muttered, "I was just checking on her." "You've been avoiding me for days. Don't lie to me, Jared. What's going on with Goldie?" Ethan's voice was sharp now, frustration creeping into his words. He could feel the unease settling in his chest as he watched Jared's lack of response. Jared shifted on his feet, his eyes flickering toward the foals in the far corner of the stall. His jaw tightened, and for a moment Ethan swore he saw a flash of something in his brother's eyes, a mixture of guilt and something darker. "I said I was checking on her," Jared repeated, but this time his voice was colder, harder, almost defensive. Ethan's gaze narrowed as he looked between Jared and the mare. Something wasn't right. There was a tension in the air, a thick layer of unspoken words that hung heavily in the barn. Jared's presence felt wrong. He wasn't acting like himself. Ethan had never seen him so distant, so guarded, and it made his stomach churn. "Why isn't she eating, Jared?" Ethan asked, his voice quieter now, as if he were testing the waters. "Why does she keep pacing like this?" Jared glanced away, his eyes shifting towards the ground. "I don't know. Maybe she's just stressed from the birth." "It happens, Ethan." Ethan didn't buy it. He had seen Goldie give birth before, and she had never acted like this. This wasn't just about stress. Something deeper was happening, something that Ethan was starting to understand, though he couldn't put it into words just yet. Before Ethan could say anything else, Dr. Lazy walked into the barn, a concerned look on her face as she took in the scene. She immediately went to Goldie's stall, where the mare was still pacing, her coat shining with sweat. "What's going on with her?" Dr. Lacey asked as she ran a hand over the mare's neck, feeling the tension in her muscles. Ethan didn't hesitate. "She hasn't been eating. She's acting strange. Like she's afraid of something?" Dr. Lacey nodded thoughtfully, her expression serious. "We need to run some tests. It could be stress, but it could also be something more. I'll have a look at her and see if we can figure it out." As Dr. Lacey began her examination, Ethan stepped back, feeling the knot in his stomach tighten. His eyes flickered over to Jared, who was still standing in the corner of the barn, staring at Goldie with an unreadable expression. "Jared," Ethan began again, his voice low and wary. "Did you do something to her?" Jared's eyes shot to him, and for a split second there was a flash of something in his gaze. Anger, maybe? Or perhaps something darker. It was gone almost as quickly as it had appeared, but Ethan had seen it, and it made his blood run cold. "Don't be ridiculous," Jared said, his tone sharp. "I'm not the one with the problem, Ethan. You're the one who's always playing the hero. Maybe if you stopped pretending everything was fine, you'd see the bigger picture." Ethan stared at his brother, confusion and frustration swirling in his chest. What was Jared trying to say? And what was he hiding? As Dr. Lacey continued her examination of Goldie, Ethan's mind raced. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. There was more to Goldie's strange behavior than just stress. And Jared was involved in ways Ethan couldn't yet understand. The truth, whatever it was slipping further and further from his grasp. And with each passing moment, the mystery surrounding Goldie's condition, only deepened. The days that followed the birth of the foals were filled with uncertainty. Despite the immediate relief that both Will and Grace had survived, Ethan couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Goldie's strange behavior only worsened. Her pacing grew more frantic, her once soft whinnies now laced with agitation. The vet, Dr. Lacey, had checked her over thoroughly, but even her professional assessment hadn't provided much comfort. "There's no immediate sign of illness," Dr. Lacey had said, but her words had done little to calm Ethan's growing worry. "She's just, unsettled. The birth was complicated, and sometimes animals act out of character when they're, under stress." But Goldie wasn't just stressed. Ethan could feel it in his gut. Something had happened during that birth, something neither he nor Dr. Lacey could explain. On the 4th day after the foals had been born, the weather turned. A sudden storm rolled in from the west, dark clouds creeping over the horizon, filling the air with the smell of rain and the rumble of distant thunder. The barn felt colder that day, and Ethan's unease only deepened. He could hear the wind howling outside, the rain pelting against the barn's roof, but inside, the barn felt eerily silent, save for the occasional clatter of hooves against the ground. Goldie was restless, her movements quick and jerky, as if she could sense something that Ethan couldn't. The foals were huddled together in a corner of the stall, trying to stay warm, but even they seemed uneasy. Will, the stronger of the two, stood up and staggered toward his mother, but Grace remained curled up, her tiny body still fragile. Ethan had been up since dawn, checking on the animals every few hours, but that afternoon, something was different. Goldie let out a low, frightened whinny, her eyes wide with panic. Her breathing had become labored, shallow, and Ethan rushed to her side, his heart pounding in his chest. "Goldie," he called out softly, reaching for her, but she backed away from his touch, her nostrils flaring. "Goldie, it's okay, girl. It's okay." But it wasn't okay. Goldie's body was trembling, and for the first time Ethan could see fear in her eyes, real fear, the kind that came from deep within, a fear that she couldn't shake. As he stood there, frozen, Jared appeared in the doorway of the barn. His eyes narrowed in the low light. He hadn't been around much the past few days, but here he was again, lingering in the shadows as if waiting for the right moment. "What's wrong with her?" Jared asked, his voice sharp, though there was something unrecognizable in it. Was it guilt? Or just concern? Ethan couldn't tell. "I don't know," Ethan replied, his voice thick with worry. "She's acting strange. She won't let me near her." Jared stepped closer, his boots clicking against the wooden floor. His eyes shifted from Goldie to the foals, then back to Ethan. He didn't say anything at first, just watched the mare, his expression unreadable. After a long moment of silence, Jared spoke again. "Maybe we should just leave her be for a while. She's been through a lot, Ethan. Maybe we're just making it worse by hovering over her." Ethan felt a surge of frustration rise up in his chest. "I'm not just hovering, Jared. I'm trying to figure out what's wrong with her. You don't get it, something's off. Something's wrong with Goldie." Jared's eyes narrowed at his younger brother, his jaw tightening. "You're being paranoid." The words stung more than they should have. But Ethan couldn't back down now. Not when everything felt so wrong, when every instinct in his body told him that there was something more, something dark, lurking beneath the surface. "I'm not paranoid," Ethan said, his voice firm. "I know this horse. I've known her my whole life, and right now she's acting like she's afraid of something. Something that's not normal." Before Jared could respond, Goldie let out another frantic whinny, her body jerking as though she had been struck by an invisible force. She backed into the far corner of the stall, her legs shaking as if she were trying to escape from something, anything. Ethan's heart raced as he watched, helpless. He reached out again, but this time Goldie let out a violent kick, narrowly missing his legs. "What the hell is going on with her?" Jared demanded, taking a step forward, his eyes wide. "I don't know," Ethan muttered, his voice shaking. "I don't know her, but I think we need to figure it out." Suddenly, Goldie collapsed onto the straw, her body racked with violent spasms. Ethan's stomach lurched. He had never seen her like this. She was struggling to breathe, her ribs heaving with every labored gasp. "Goldie!" Ethan cried out, rushing to her side. "Goldie, come on, girl. You've got to fight. Don't leave me now." Jared stood back, watching with wide, helpless eyes. Ethan could see it now. Jared wasn't just concerned, he was afraid. But there was something more, something in his brother's expression that Ethan couldn't quite place. "Get Dr. Lacey," Jared finally said, his voice strained. "Now!" Ethan didn't waste another second. He rushed out of the barn, the wind and rain hitting him like a slap in the face. His heart was pounding in his chest as he fumbled for his phone, dialing the vet's number in a panic. Dr. Lacey, it's Ethan," he gasped as soon as the call connected. "Goldie, she's not okay. Something's happening. You've got to get here. Now." The line was silent for a moment before Dr. Lacey's voice came through, calm but urgent. "I'm on my way, Ethan. Hang in there. I'll be there as fast as I can." Ethan rushed back to the barn, where Jared was still standing, watching Goldie with a strange look in his eyes. The mare's spasms had slowed, but her breathing was shallow, each exhale a labored gasp. Ethan couldn't help but wonder, was this just a complication of the birth? Or was something else going on? Something that no one, not even Dr. Lacey, had anticipated? As he knelt beside Goldie, her body still trembling, one thought stuck in Ethan's mind. This was far from over, and the truth was closer than he realized. Ethan couldn't bring himself to leave Goldie's side, even as Dr. Lacey arrived at the barn with her usual brisk professionalism. The vet's eyes scanned the mare, the tension in the air palpable as she quickly assessed Goldie's condition. Jared stood off to the side, his arms folded tightly across his chest, not offering any help. Ethan could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him as he watched Dr. Lacey work, his heart hammering in his chest. "She's weak," Dr. Lacey muttered, running her fingers over Goldie's ribs, pressing gently to check for any signs of injury. "But physically, there's nothing obvious here. Her heart rate's elevated and she's stressed, but there's no injury I can see. We'll need to monitor her closely, though. She's been through a lot." Ethan nodded, but the unease that had settled deep within him only grew stronger. There had to be more to this. Goldie had always been strong, always resilient. But now she was shaking, her body trembling as though caught in a nightmare. The way she had been acting for the past few days, jittery, unpredictable, it wasn't normal. Something had changed, and Ethan was certain it was more than just stress. "I think it's something more," Ethan said quietly, his eyes not leaving Goldie. "I think something happened during the birth." Dr. Lacey glanced up at him, her brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" Ethan swallowed hard. He'd been trying to ignore the nagging suspicion in his mind, but now it was impossible to ignore. "The foals," he said, his voice low. "The twins. They're not just a rare occurrence. They're unusual. Goldie's never acted like this before. And I'm not sure, but it feels like she's afraid of something." Dr. Lacey sighed, setting down her stethoscope. "Ethan, I understand your concern, but animals can act differently after a traumatic experience. A difficult birth can cause a lot of stress. It's possible that she's just reacting to that." But Ethan didn't buy it. He could feel it in his gut. There was more to this. There had to be. "Then why did she kick out at me earlier?" Ethan's voice was tight with frustration. "Why won't she let anyone near her? Why is she acting like she's afraid of something? It doesn't make sense." Dr. Lacey didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped back and regarded Ethan carefully, as if weighing his words. "I can't say for certain, but I'll keep an eye on her. In the meantime, you should keep the foals as close to her as possible. That's usually the best way to keep a mare calm. Make sure she feels the presence of her young." Ethan nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Goldie wasn't acting like herself. She wasn't just stressed, she was terrified. And he had a sinking feeling that whatever was haunting her, it was linked to something far deeper than just the birth. Later that evening, as the storm outside continued to rage, Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat in the dimly lit kitchen, staring out the window as the wind howled through the trees, rattling the old house. The flickering light from the storm made the shadows dance on the walls, but it couldn't shake the dark thoughts that clouded his mind. What was wrong with Goldie? What was causing her fear? And why was Jared acting so strangely? Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that his brother was hiding something. Jared had been very distant, not just in his actions, but in his eyes. There had been a flicker of something he couldn't quite identify. When Goldie had acted out earlier that day, that thought had been gnawing at Ethan all day, and he finally couldn't ignore it anymore. He had to find out what Jared was hiding. After a few hours of restless pacing, Ethan decided he had to investigate. He slipped quietly out of the house and into the barn, the cool night air biting at his skin. The barn was dark except for the faint glow of the overhead light. But Goldie's stall was still lit with a soft, steady light that made her figure look almost ghostly. She lay on the straw, eyes wide, her body trembling, but she seemed calmer now, at least for the moment. Ethan walked slowly toward the back of the barn, where a small security camera had been set up by their father years ago. It was a relic, an old system that barely worked, but Ethan had started checking the footage from it after he'd noticed Jared's strange behavior. He rewound the footage, watching as days of footage flickered by. At first, it seemed like nothing. There was Jared, walking in and out of the barn, sometimes checking on the horses, other times simply standing there, his face drawn in thought. But then, something caught Ethan's eye. It was from 2 months ago. Long before the foals had been born, Ethan saw Jared walking into the barn late one night, just after midnight. He was carrying something wrapped in a cloth that looked too large to be anything ordinary. Jared's movements were careful, methodical, as if he didn't want anyone to see him. Ethan's stomach dropped. He had never seen this footage before, never thought to check it until now. The next scene made his blood run cold. Jared approached Goldie's stall with a slow, almost cautious step. He opened the door quietly, checking both ways, as though he was being watched. Ethan could see his brother talking to the mare, speaking softly to her, too softly for the camera to pick up the words. Then, Jared did something that made Ethan's heart stop. He reached into the bag and pulled out something that made Goldie back away in alarm. It was a syringe, a needle, a sedative. Ethan's hand flew to his mouth as the realization hit him like a punch. Jared hadn't just been taking care of Goldie, he had been drugging her. Ethan's thoughts spun wildly as he watched the rest of the footage, his mind struggling to keep up with the shock. Jared had been the one who had caused Goldie's strange behavior. He had been keeping her calm, sedating her to make sure the birth went as planned. And then there was the real question. Why? Had Jared done it to keep the foals alive? Or had there been another, darker reason? Ethan's body was trembling as he paused the footage. He knew one thing for certain now. This wasn't just about a difficult birth. Jared was hiding something that could shatter everything. Ethan stood motionless in front of the old security footage, his mind racing as the image of Jared holding the syringe played on a loop in his mind. His brother had been drugging Goldie. But why? What could Jared possibly want with a sedated mare? The more Ethan thought about it, the more the pieces of the puzzle refused to fit together. He wasn't sure he even wanted to know the full truth. But he had to know. With a shaking hand, Ethan pressed pause on the video and exhaled sharply, trying to clear his head. The barn was silent around him, the only sound the faint hum of the old security camera system. His breath came in quick, shallow bursts as he replayed the footage in his mind, trying to make sense of everything. Jared had been up to something for months, and Ethan had been blind to it. He'd been so focused on caring for the animals, on making sure the farm stayed intact, that he'd ignored his brother's odd behavior. But now, the truth was staring him in the face. Jared wasn't just the older brother who had come back to Ashland broken and bitter. He was hiding something darker, a secret that threatened to unravel everything. Ethan didn't know how long he stood there in the barn, staring at the footage. But eventually, he knew he had no choice. He couldn't let this go. He had to confront Jared. The longer he waited, the deeper the lies would grow. Taking a deep breath, he turned off the screen and headed back toward the house. The storm had passed, but the air was thick with tension, the weight of the secrets hanging over him like a storm cloud. His heart hammered in his chest as he approached the house, his eyes scanning the windows for any sign of Jared. He found him sitting at the kitchen table, his back turned, as if waiting for Ethan to make the first move. Jared hadn't even looked up when Ethan entered the room, his posture rigid and tense. Ethan stood in the doorway for a moment, trying to steady his breathing. His brother was so close, and yet so far away. "Jared," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper, but it was enough to get Jared's attention. Jared looked up slowly, his eyes dark, but his expression unreadable. "What is it?" Ethan's stomach twisted. "We need to talk." Jared's eyes flickered with something. Fear, maybe, or guilt. But he didn't say anything. He just stared at his younger brother, waiting for him to continue. "I saw the footage," Ethan said, his voice tight with anger. "I saw what you did. Goldie, You've been drugging her." The words hung in the air between them like a dead weight, and for a moment, the only sound in the room was the soft rustle of the wind outside, brushing against the windows. Jared didn't speak at first, his gaze fixed on the floor, avoiding Ethan's eyes. But Ethan could see the way his brother's hands clenched into fists, the way his jaw tightened. "I did it for her," Jared finally muttered, his voice barely audible, almost like he was trying to justify himself. "I had to make sure she gave birth to the foals." "You don't understand, Ethan. The farm was failing, and I thought, if I could just get Goldie to have the twins, it would make everything better." Ethan's head spun. Make everything better? By drugging her? By using her like some tool? Jared's face twisted with frustration. "You don't get it. We needed those foals. I needed them. Without them, we were finished. The bank was about to take the farm. I was trying to save us, Ethan. You don't know what it's like to be the one who's responsible for everything. I couldn't just sit back and let this place go under." Ethan's chest tightened with a mixture of disbelief and anger. "You think that justifies what you did? You think hurting Goldie and lying to me is the way to save this farm? I've been busting my ass here, Jared, doing everything I can to keep things running, and you—" He stopped himself. His words caught in his throat. He could feel the betrayal cutting through him like a knife. "You took matters into your own hands. You didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. You didn't trust anyone." Jared's eyes hardened, the defensive mask slipping back into place. "You were too busy being the good guy, Ethan. Too busy playing the saint to see what was really going on. I did what I had to do to keep this place alive." Ethan shook his head, the weight of his brother's words sinking deep into his chest. He had always looked up to Jared, admired his confidence and ambition, even when it was wrapped in arrogance. But now he saw his brother for who he truly was, a man who would do anything, even harm the animals they cared for, just to get what he wanted. "You should have told me," Ethan said quietly, his voice trembling with emotion. "You should have trusted me. We're family, Jared. We're supposed to be in this together." Jared didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked away, his eyes filled with regret and something darker. Fear, maybe. For a moment, it felt like the old Jared was slipping away, replaced by someone Ethan didn't recognize. "I thought I could, fix everything," Jared finally said, his voice breaking, the walls of defensiveness cracking. I thought if I just, got those foals, if I could just make this work, everything would be fine. I didn't want to let you down. I didn't want to let anyone down." Ethan's anger softened just enough to allow the hurt to seep in. Jared's desperation was clear now, but the damage had been done. Ethan had trusted his brother, and now everything was tainted by the lies. "I'm sorry, Ethan," Jared said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant for things to get this out of hand." Ethan looked at him, his chest heavy with the weight of betrayal. "It's too late for that." The silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. Ethan knew he couldn't change the past. But the farm was still there, and the future was still uncertain. He had a choice to make. I want you to leave, Jared," Ethan said, his voice firm but tinged with sadness. "You need to go. I can't have you here anymore. Not with what you've done." Jared's face fell, and for the first time, Ethan saw the full weight of his brother's guilt. Jared stood up slowly, his shoulders slumped in defeat, and without saying another word, he turned and left the kitchen, his footsteps echoing in the hallway as he disappeared into the night. Ethan stood there for a long time after, his heart heavy with a mixture of sorrow and relief. He hadn't wanted to make this decision, but it was the only one he could make. Goldie, the foals, the farm, they needed him now more than ever. And Jared, he needed to face the consequences of his actions, even if it meant walking away from everything he had once called home. Ethan didn't sleep that night. The house was silent, too quiet, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Goldie, still in the barn, had settled down a little after Jared left, though her restlessness hadn't fully faded. Will and Grace were doing fine. But the weight of what had just transpired hung heavy on Ethan's shoulders. His brother, the one person who had been his anchor, had now turned into the source of all the turmoil. There was no going back now. Ethan was alone with the responsibility of everything. When the first light of dawn crept through the cracks in the barn doors, Ethan felt a strange sense of finality settle in. Jared was gone. There was no more running from the truth, no more escaping the mess that had been created, but Ethan wasn't sure if he was ready to carry the weight of it all. It wasn't just about the farm anymore. It was about everything. His family, his trust in his brother, and the fear that had lodged itself deep inside him after seeing the footage. What had Jared truly done? And how far had he been willing to go to save himself? The decision to keep going had never been clearer, but the burden had never felt heavier. Ethan pulled on his boots and stepped outside, the morning chill biting at his skin as he walked toward the barn. The air was still, the only sound the crunch of his boots on the frost-covered ground. As he approached Goldie's stall, he saw her standing there, her coat still slick with sweat from the previous day's ordeal. Her eyes flickered over to him as he opened the door, a silent acknowledgement of his presence. Ethan reached out and ran a hand along her mane, feeling the warmth of her body against his. She wasn't just an animal to him, she was family. "Hey, girl," he whispered, leaning his forehead against hers for a moment. "I'm sorry about all of this." Goldie nickered softly, nudging him with her nose. Her trust in him was unshaken, even after everything that had happened. She was a creature of instinct, driven by the simplest desires: food, safety, the companionship of her foals. But Ethan felt a deep connection to her, one that went beyond words. She had always been a constant presence in his life, always there when he needed her. And now, in this moment of silence, she was all he had. Ethan spent the morning tending to the animals, checking on Goldie and the foals, making sure they had everything they needed. He had never done this alone before, not at this scale. His mother had passed when he was young, and Jared had always been there to help with the heavy lifting, both literally and figuratively. But now it was just him. The weight of responsibility was pressing down on him, making every task feel like an uphill battle. By midday, Ethan was exhausted. His hands ached from feeding the foals and cleaning the stalls, his back sore from bending over the hay bales, and his mind was consumed with a constant stream of thoughts. Jared's betrayal still burned in his chest, and even though he had asked his brother to leave, a part of him wondered if he had made the right decision. Was he pushing his brother away for good? Or was this just the way things had to be? He didn't have time to dwell on it. The farm needed him. Goldie and the foals needed him. And even though it felt like the world was crumbling around him, Ethan knew he had to keep moving. There was no other choice. As he walked back toward the barn for the evening check, he was met by a familiar face. Mrs. Langston, the retired trainer, stood at the entrance holding a basket of supplies. She had been a lifeline for him, always there when he needed help. Even though she was older now, she still had the same sharp eyes and quick wit. "You look like you could use a break, Ethan," Mrs. Langston said, her voice warm but knowing. "I brought some more grain for the foals and some of my homemade liniment for Goldie's legs." Ethan smiled wearily. "Thanks, Mrs. Langston. I don't know what I would do without you." She shook her head. "Don't mention it. I've seen what you're doing here, and you're doing more than anyone could expect. You're a good boy, Ethan. A good man." He felt a knot form in his throat at her words. He wasn't sure if he believed that about himself, but hearing it from Mrs. Langston meant more than he could express. She was one of the few people who still saw him as more than just a kid, more than just someone trying to fill shoes that didn't quite fit. I don't know if I'm doing enough," Ethan admitted, his voice low. "I feel like everything's falling apart, and I'm just trying to hold it together." She patted his shoulder, her hands gentle but firm. "You're doing more than enough. And remember, you're not alone in this. You've got your community behind you." Ethan nodded, his heart heavy but grateful. He had always felt isolated out here on the farm, but Mrs. Langston's words reminded him of something he had forgotten. The farm wasn't just about the land and the animals. It was about the people who cared for them. It was about the relationships that tied them all together, no matter how broken the pieces seemed. As Mrs. Langston left for the day, she turned to Ethan one last time. "Don't forget to take care of yourself, too," she said, a knowing smile on her lips. "Nut, you got a big job ahead of you, but it's worth it. The animals, this farm, they need someone like you. Don't forget that." After she was gone, Ethan took a deep breath, standing in the doorway of the barn. The foals were grazing in the field, their tiny bodies growing stronger with each passing day. Goldie was resting, her eyes soft as she watched them, her motherly instincts fully intact. Ethan knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The farm had been through a lot, and so had he, but there was still a glimmer of hope, a sense of purpose that kept him moving forward. He might be alone now, but he wasn't without support, and as long as he had the strength to keep going, he knew he could make it through. He looked out at the horizon, and the sun beginning to dip below the hills. The day was ending, but it wasn't over. There was still work to be done, still a future to build. And for the first time in days, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The days bled together in a whirlwind of chores, sleepless nights, and constant worry. The weather had warmed slightly, the oppressive chill of the storm finally giving way to the crisp autumn air. Yet, even as the seasons changed, Ethan felt as though time had come to a grinding halt. It was the same routine each day: feeding the foals, caring for Goldie, fixing fences, and mending barns. Tasks that once felt like part of a rhythm now felt like mountains he had to scale alone. Ethan knew he couldn't keep going this way forever. The weight of Jared's betrayal still hung over him, the distance between them growing by the day. He had made the right decision, telling his brother to leave, but it didn't make the silence any less deafening. The farm felt emptier than ever, and the responsibility of it all was overwhelming. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows across the fields, Ethan was feeding Will and Grace, who were growing fast, their coats thickening in preparation for the coming cold. He was so absorbed in his task, in the comforting simplicity of taking care of them, that he didn't notice the figure approaching from the distance until they were nearly upon him. "Evening, Ethan." Ethan looked up to see Mrs. Langston again, but this time there was something different in her posture, something less casual, more deliberate. She was holding a small bundle of blankets. Beside her was a young girl who couldn't have been more than 10 or 11 years old. The girl was holding a small, handmade halter in her hands, a soft pink ribbon tied at the top. "Mrs. Langston?" Ethan asked, surprised to see her again. "What's this?" Mrs. Langston gave him a small smile, her eyes twinkling with a mixture of mischief and kindness. "This is Sarah," she said, nodding toward the little girl, who stepped forward shyly, holding out the halter. "Sarah's been coming by to visit the foals every chance she gets. I thought it was time you met her properly." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "The foals?" "Yes," Mrs. Langston said with a knowing smile. "Sarah's got a special way with animals. Well, she's been asking for a way to contribute to the farm. So I thought I'd bring her by and let her help." Sarah, still standing a little ways back, hesitated before holding out the halter. "I made this for Grace," she said softly. "It's for when she gets bigger. I thought you might need it." Ethan took the halter from her gently, his heart swelling a little at the gesture. He hadn't realized just how much help he needed. He hadn't even considered that other people in the community might want to pitch in. Sarah's quiet determination reminded him of what he had been missing: the strength of his community. The very thing that had always been here for him. even when he hadn't asked for it. "Thank you, Sarah," he said, kneeling down so he could look her in the eyes. "This is beautiful. Grace will love it." Sarah smiled shyly, her cheeks flushed with the compliment. "I just want to help," she said quietly, looking down at her feet. "My mom says that when you take care of something small, it makes you stronger." "I think that's true." Ethan stood up slowly, gazing down at the small halter. There was a quiet wisdom in Sarah's words, something that resonated deep within him. He hadn't realized how much he'd needed a reminder, how much he'd forgotten that, even in his solitude, he wasn't truly alone. Mrs. Langston gave Ethan a nudge with her elbow. "Don't let it go to your head, young man. You've still got a lot of work to do. But sometimes it's the little things that matter most. You've been keeping this farm afloat all on your own, but that doesn't mean you have to do it in isolation." Ethan stood there for a long moment, taking in the simple gesture, the way the farm seemed to come alive again, if only for a brief moment. It was more than just about the work. It was about the community, about people like Mrs. Langston and Sarah, who still believed in the value of hard work, but who also understood that no one could carry a burden alone forever. "Well," Mrs. Langston continued, "now that we've got that out of the way, I've brought some extra supplies for Goldie and the foals. You've got to keep up with their health if you want them to make it through the winter. And I thought you might like some help with the fence repairs. Seems like you've been letting that slide." Ethan laughed, a sound that felt strange after so many days of silence. "You've got a sharp eye, Mrs. Langston. I haven't had time to do anything outside of the barn lately. We'll get it done. No problem," she said, with the quiet confidence that only comes from experience. "And Sarah and I can come by a few times a week. We'll take care of the little things, the things you might miss if you're too busy." Ethan nodded, a sense of relief flooding through him. The weight on his shoulders hadn't disappeared, but it was lighter now. The presence of Sarah and Mrs. Langston, their willingness to help, had reminded him of something he'd forgotten: the importance of letting others in. He didn't have to carry the burden alone. As Mrs. Langston and Sarah began to set to work, Ethan felt a small but significant shift in his heart. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, he felt the glimmer of hope. Maybe he wasn't alone. After all, maybe the community that had been there for him all along could still be the lifeline he needed. Later that evening, as the sun set behind the hills, casting a warm, golden glow over the farm, Ethan stood at the edge of the field watching Sarah work with the foals. Her laughter, light and unburdened, rang through the barnyard as Will and Grace chased after her, their hooves kicking up the soft dirt in playful abandon. For a brief moment, Ethan allowed himself to relax, to simply watch. The farm wasn't just his responsibility. It never had been. And it was this realization, more than anything, that gave him the strength to face whatever came next. The weight on his shoulders was still there, but now he knew he didn't have to carry it alone. The farm was alive again. In the weeks that followed Mrs. Langston's visit, Ethan found a rhythm that was both familiar and new. With the help of Sarah and the supplies Mrs. Langston had brought, he could focus on what truly mattered: Goldie, Will, and Grace. They had all made remarkable strides, their strength and vitality growing every day. Even Goldie, despite the initial fear and stress that had plagued her, was settling into a calmer routine. Ethan had spent hours watching her with the foals, seeing how her protective instincts guided every move she made, and it filled him with pride to see her thriving. But the change wasn't just in the animals. It was in Ethan, too. The farm that had once felt like a burden had slowly begun to feel like a purpose. For the first time in a long while, he felt as though he was doing something worthwhile. He wasn't just maintaining the farm, he was nurturing it, watching life grow where there had once been only struggle. Goldie's foals were growing stronger by the day. Will had already developed a sturdy frame, his legs straightening out, his coat glistening in the sun. Grace, smaller but just as determined, was gaining confidence. She would now try to trot alongside her mother, her small body wobbly but filled with youthful exuberance. The two foals had become symbols of hope for Ethan, reminders that, despite the challenges, life had a way of pushing forward. But it wasn't just the foals that had given Ethan a new sense of purpose. It was the community that had come together to support him. Mrs. Langston had made sure of that. With her guidance, Ethan started to see the farm not as a lonely, burdensome place, but as a living, breathing entity that needed not just his care, but the care of everyone who loved it. People from all over Ashland, many of whom he had barely spoken to before, were now offering their help. Neighbors brought over tools, materials, and advice. Sarah, with her shy smile and bright eyes, had even started to come by daily to check on the foals, bringing with her little gifts, handmade halters, woven blankets, and even small drawings of the animals that filled the barn. It was a reminder to Ethan that he wasn't as alone as he had felt. The farm had taken on a new life, not just because of the animals, but because of the people who cared enough to lend a hand. And with each passing day, Ethan was realizing that it wasn't just about keeping the farm alive. It was about building something that would endure, something that would be a part of the community, a testament to resilience and strength. That afternoon, as Ethan worked on the fence in the far corner of the property, he felt the weight of his own transformation. The work was tiring, but it was something he could sink his hands into, something that grounded him. He paused for a moment, wiping sweat from his brow, and looked out over the field. There, in the distance, he saw a small group of children from town, laughing as they ran toward the barn, eager to see the foals. For a moment, Ethan was struck by the sight. The laughter of the children, their voices light and carefree, filled the air. They had heard the stories of Goldie and her foals, of Ethan's tireless efforts to save the farm, and they were eager to witness it for themselves. It was a reminder of just how far the farm had come in such a short amount of time. As the children approached, Sarah was the first to greet them, leading them into the barn with a proud smile. Ethan couldn't help but smile as he watched the young girl take charge, explaining everything she had learned about caring for the animals. It was clear that she had found a connection to the farm, one that mirrored his own, and seeing that made Ethan's heart swell with pride. "You've done good, Ethan," Mrs. Langston said, appearing beside him, her voice filled with warmth. She looked over at the group of children, her eyes soft. This farm means something to these kids now. They're seeing what hard work can do, and they're seeing what happens when a community pulls together. Ethan nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. It's not just about keeping the farm running anymore. It's about showing them what it means to work for something that matters. This place, it's more than just land and animals. It's part of who we are. Mrs. Langston smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. You've learned more than you realize, Ethan, and you've shown them that even in the darkest of times, there's always room for new life, for new purpose. Ethan turned to watch Sarah leading the children back to the foals, their laughter ringing out across the field. He had spent so long feeling like he was losing, like he was drowning in the weight of responsibility. But now, for the first time, he could see the true value of everything he had worked for. It wasn't about saving the farm for himself. It was about giving it a chance to become something more, something that could inspire and teach the next generation. The kids were all gathered around Will and Grace, their eyes wide with wonder as they watched the foals nuzzle their way through the hay. It wasn't just the foals that were growing. Ethan realized that he, too, was changing. The hard lessons, the pain of betrayal, the fear of failure, they had all shaped him into someone who was ready to take on whatever came next. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the barnyard, Ethan stood at the edge of the field, taking it all in. The barn was filled with voices, the air rich with the scent of hay and earth. Goldie stood by her foals, her eyes calm as she watched them interact with the children. Everything, for the first time in what felt like forever, felt right. the barn, the farm, the animals. They were all alive in ways that transcended the work that had kept him up late at night. It was more than just a place. It was a sanctuary, a space where life and hope thrived and where people came together to protect what couldn't protect itself. Ethan's thoughts turned to the future, to the legacy he could create, not just for himself, but for the people who had stood by him. He didn't know what the road ahead would look like. But for the first time, he felt ready to face it. And as he watched the foals play, the community surrounding him, and the stars beginning to twinkle overhead, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't just saving the farm, he was building something that would last. The night had settled in, and the farm lay still, beneath a blanket of stars. Ethan sat on the old wooden fence that bordered the pasture, the same fence that had seen years of wear and tear, just like the farm itself. The grass beneath his boots was cool and damp, the scent of the earth mixing with the soft aroma of hay from the barn. He gazed out across the field, his heart light, but his mind filled with the quiet hum of thoughts and reflections. Goldie, with her once worried eyes now calm and steady, grazed nearby, her two foals trotting beside her, their small bodies strong and full of life. Will and Grace, the twins, had grown faster than he ever imagined. They were a reminder of how far he had come and how far the farm had come with him. Ethan's fingers rested lightly on the fence, his eyes following the foals as they galloped and tumbled through the field. Will kicked up his heels in joy, and Grace, with her smaller frame, tried her best to keep up. Their innocent laughter was a sound Ethan had not expected to hear. Yet here it was, free, pure, and unburdened by the weight of the past. For so long, Ethan had felt as if he was merely surviving, trapped by the shadows of betrayal, the weight of responsibility, and the fear of failure. He had struggled to keep the farm afloat, alone in the silence that had surrounded him after his mother's passing and his brother's departure. But now, as he sat there in the fading light of the evening, watching the foals leap freely, something within him shifted. Ethan didn't have to carry this burden by himself anymore. He wasn't alone. The community had proven that. Mrs. Langston, Sarah, and the others who had stepped forward in the weeks since Jared left had shown him the true meaning of strength. They had shown him that the farm wasn't just a place to work, it was a living, breathing part of something much larger than him, something that brought people together. As the foals ran, laughing in the way only young animals could, Ethan thought of all that had happened. His brother's betrayal still stung, but in a strange way, it had opened his eyes to what he had been missing. Trust had been broken, but through that, new bonds had been forged. He had seen the good in people, in the ones who hadn't turned away, and in the ones who believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. He thought about the conversations he'd had with Mrs. Langston, the quiet wisdom she'd shared. Sometimes family fails you, but doing the right thing will never let you down. Those words rang in his ears now as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the land. Ethan knew that he had done the right thing in asking Jared to leave. Despite the hurt, the loss, and the anger, he had chosen the farm, the animals, and the community. He had chosen to fight for what mattered most, even if it meant standing alone. He wasn't responsible for Jared's choices, but he was responsible for his own. And by doing the right thing, he had built something stronger than betrayal. He had built trust, purpose, and a future. As he sat there on the fence, he heard the familiar sound of footsteps behind him. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Mrs. Langston had come to sit beside him, her weathered hands resting on her knees. They shared the silence for a few moments, watching the foals continue their carefree dance in the twilight. "They're growing up fast," she said, her voice soft but filled with pride. "They sure are," Ethan replied, his gaze never leaving the foals. "I never imagined it would be like this. I thought I was just trying to save the farm. But now, I realize it's more than that. It's about giving something to the world, something that can keep going long after I'm gone." Mrs. Langston nodded slowly, her eyes gleaming in the dim light. Exactly. It's about passing on what you've learned, what you've built, so that it can keep growing. Not just for you, but for everyone. Ethan turned to look at her, gratitude in his eyes. I don't know if I would have gotten through this without you, without all of you. I was so focused on doing it alone that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. Mrs. Langston smiled, her face weathered but warm. That's the hardest lesson to learn, Ethan. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is let people in. They're not there to take from you. They're there to help you grow, too. Ethan looked out across the field once more, the full weight of her words sinking in. It wasn't just about the farm anymore. It wasn't even just about survival. It was about giving, about creating something that would outlast him, something that would inspire others. It was about making a difference, even if it was in small ways. I think you've done that already, Mrs. Langston said, her voice thoughtful. Look at the way the communities are rallied around you. You've inspired them, Ethan. That's a gift that can't be taken away. The quiet power of her words echoed in Ethan's chest. He had been so focused on surviving, on keeping the farm alive, that he hadn't realized the ripple effect he had created. It wasn't just about the animals or the land. It was about people, about the connections that formed when they came together. That was what had made the difference. As the last light of the day faded and the stars began to take their places in the sky, Ethan sat in silence, his heart full. He didn't have all the answers. He wasn't sure what the future held. But for the first time in a long while, he didn't need to know. The farm was alive. The foals were alive. And so was he. Ethan didn't ask for any of it, the pain, the betrayal, the struggle. But he had chosen to carry it. And in doing so, he had saved more than just the farm. He had saved himself. And as he watched Goldie stand proudly next to her foals, the moonlight casting a soft glow over the field, he realized that the right choice wasn't always the easy one, but it was the one that made all the difference. You're not responsible for other people's choices, the voice of the narrator echoed softly in his mind. But you are responsible for what you do with the truth. Sometimes family fails you, but doing the right thing will never let you down. And when you fight to protect what can't protect itself, you become more than brave. You become a guardian. Ethan smiled, his heart swelling with a quiet peace he hadn't known before. He was more than just the keeper of the farm. He was its protector, its guardian. And as the foals pranced through the field, full of life and joy, he knew that whatever came next, he was ready for it.